Hey, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to do our most advanced approach, working directly to watercolor. Now, it might seem like a jump, something completely different, but it's the same strategy that we did before, working larger to smaller, that outside-in approach. So we're going to do silhouettes in color, and then come back for those small details with calligraphic brushstrokes. So this is the tinting approach that we did before, and here it is, direct watercolor. This is this silhouette first, then adding the details, that same larger to smaller. You can see how it's going to work. But we're going to do a subject in motion. So we're going for these guys. I loved some of the footage we had of all the color of these kids playing soccer. So we're going to do a full motion subject with this approach of silhouettes. So here we have the blank page. And the best way to tackle this is just to dive right in. Start directly with a silhouette. So what I loved about these kids was the color of the shirts. There's going to be a lot of this orange, purple. First I'll get some colors out. Those puddles of two-color mixes that I talked about before. A little bit of warm and cool mix always together. So I have reservoirs to work towards. Now I'm watching video. In the field there'd be kids all over racing around, and you pick somebody that you think is a good subject. And you're looking for them to come back closer to you. They're going to be running in circles, looping around, and then when you find a pose that you like this action, that first shape, the first statement, is just going to be a watery silhouette. I just remembered that. Remember exactly like we used to do with the pencil? We get that big torso in. There's almost nothing to it but a shape. Just a little clue, just a little code for later. But I'm going to grow the pieces. What comes out of, he's got these blue shorts connected to it while it's still wet. And there was some action going on here with one kid fighting away from another, keeping the ball away from another. So the beauty of these wet shapes is you work very quickly. And the color is just going to fuse together. Sometimes I'll pull the edges out to create a softening effect because I'm coming back later for details. What I want now is just to egg that head. Just generally, what is the basic area it's in? Because I'm going to come back for it. There's a bit of a delayed gratification. That you just have to set something up now. There's that pose I saw as these kids are tussling for the ball. The shirt is really flowing. And it's going to seem, I always have this feeling in the middle of a painting like this one's doomed, it's terrible. That you don't, while it's at that stage, it's so rough you think like there's nothing there. That's what I mean by that delayed gratification. You kind of have to wait for it and it builds up over time. See the charging in, two colors together? The resolution of the picture builds up over time. You start to see the shapes appearing. But see how I'm subdividing the silhouette into shirt and pants? It's that, looking for the next largest division, like we did by attaching the head to the body. A little arm action here. You can see why sometimes I call it calligraphy, that these strokes are like calligraphy. Trying to get a shape, working the shape with the brush while it's wet, enough that it'll blend with this other to make a soft transition so that I have a floating, it's like open line, that I want these shapes to not be too distinct yet. So I have a little bit of wiggle room to come back later. That's just that shadow in the back of his head. All right, so we have a horizon line behind the soccer field. Well, there's a soccer ball right in there. Just some notes of where that horizon is. We'll pull. That's generally the vicinity of the soccer ball itself, but it's not that dark, just saving that space. So there's all kinds of kids in the background, and when I look for people to add to these scenes, these have become the star, that little interaction. And now I'm looking for other people to add to the scene. And I combine activity. I mean, the ones that are pacing back and forth, waiting to get into the game, I might fuse a couple of those kids together. There's a general vicinity. Okay, so this is a little bit of sketching with the brush here. That's almost like my pencil gestures. But then I can fill right into that mass. And I'm just growing one shape into the next, where this kid's jeans, I'm just gonna like this bit where they touch that form. One shape is in front of the next. These little things happen by accident, and you start to get compositional tricks that you can look for. You're like, hey, there's a chance to do that. Get that one shape to block up to the next one. Right. And I might, I know I want another guy somewhere about here. That's the mass of a shirt. Soften that edge out a bit. I made him bigger, made his body larger. So often I'll work these big shapes and then pull some fine detail out of it. So it is brush and it is silhouettes, but it doesn't mean that you won't have any linear marks in it. The brush is, I mean, what's great about working up towards this, the brush can do everything. It does something, it can do the fine line or the biggest shapes all in one tool. It's kind of great to only have to have one thing with you. I'll clip this palette right onto the board and I can be walking around and painting without even holding still. So I travel, do a little sketch walk through a neighborhood, and it's just such a simple thing to just have the brush and your palette with you. Kind of gives you that sense of you're a roaming adventurer traveling and sketching. Sometimes I'll be adding people together that come from entirely different situations. Like these guys are all in this game together, but if I'm wandering the piazzas in Italy, I'll just collect people as I go, looking for shots. Here I'm looking for shots that describe the play that's going on in front of me, but I might be looking for just the most interesting people, the characters that I come across by accident. I suppose it's the same as documentary photography in a way. Sports photography in this case, or travelogue. You're saying, what are those little moments? See how okay, that's again, pants to shirt, and I want those forms to touch, so they fuse together, so that silhouette is an outside form that I'm going to use later to be the basis in my detail, and I'll pull the legs out of it. And I talked before about that term, growing the wash. It grows from one step to another. So there's a nice wide stance. He's really got his legs are flying. This guy's been headless for a while. Head somewhere in that general area. Okay, so tissue. These are the loose silhouettes. And one of the advantages of working multiple figures is that I'm moving around, getting a little bit here, a little bit there, but by now these first ones are starting to dry. So I can just keep working continuously. So I'll come back to these guys. Remember before we had to pause for it to dry, so on these larger pieces, I don't have to wait. I'm ready. Yeah, if you feel the paper and it's still cool to the touch, it's a little damp, but I think I'm all right here. This guy had a striped shirt. So that's that larger to smaller. I had a big silhouette, right? But now I'm coming back for a little detail like the stripes. And I'm certainly not trying to get every one of them or even worry that they're close at all. Just the impression. It's impressionism. I'm going for my darks to put the hair in. So these blobs, they sort of look like nothing. And remember when I started that hair? See how it's lightened as it dries up? I always know I'll come back again and hit these darks a second time. I'm doing, this is another thing I'll mention. I put my little finger down first. It's like bridging, it's like shooting pool. That little finger, that's my bridge. And I can do this brushwork having that little bit of support there. Helps me get little detail marks. I want to get the way this kid's hair is. He's kind of got big hair. Get some auburn color into there. This guy, a little more ginger. I like to think the mass first, and then some transitional marks. When you want to get very small marks, you need more paint, less water. You want to be sort of drier to get really small marks. If the paint is a little thicker, then you can get these little gestural or floating ticks. If the paint's too wet, it's hard to get a sharp line like that. If by too wet, I mean if there's not enough pigment, too much water. So suddenly the head starts to appear. I'll put in, let's build his form. So it's these little cast shadows like the sleeve and the collar. Those contact shadows, remember I talked before about contact shadows? Suddenly that just amorphous mass is starting to become a solid thing. And by finding a shadow shape like the back shoulder perhaps. That one's a little dark. I'll just touch it with water and do a lift. Put that back in with blue. That back shoulder. And there's some little calligraphy of his hands on the ball. So you have to say to yourself, when I'm doing this kind of thing, I know in advance that it's going to be an organic, kind of flowing impression of the thing, that the watercolor is going to give me a spontaneous look. So I'm not even going to worry if I don't get a hand right. You know, how many fingers are on that hand? I have no idea. It's just a shape. If I think about the shadows, like where his neck is under his chin, where the side of the face is, the eye sockets in general, so that face starts to appear. But I'm going to come back and refine it, so I'm just looking for the shape first, and then I'll come back when that dries. And this fellow here, this guy has I think he's one of these fellows with a solid shirt, but I like that the soccer players have kind of a uniform thing going. There's some shirts out there with patterns, so I'll draw that striped shirt pattern. So because I have the basic gesture initially, I know where to place my details to get it on top. So there's the sleeve and there's a collar, and it starts to look like the jersey. And this kind of thing, there's a number on the back of the jersey. When I'm doing numbers like signage in a city street or you know, text on things, again, just imply. See how I left open line in there? I don't overly draw it in, because then it can really stand out too much. Because this thing's in motion, you don't really see it. Even when you're watching it in real life, there's a blur as it goes by. There's an opportunity for a dark in there, and then to separate the shorts from the shirt, just an accent, a contact shadow. Restate those darks there. Let's get a few details on these guys in the background. Don't forget them. A little hairstyle. That thing I had said before about head shape, hair shape. It's the subdivision question again. First you have an egg. What's the next largest shape? It's the hair on top of the egg. And then what's the third largest shape? It's probably the shadow under the chin. So he's way back there in the distance, but he's appearing as a character. So restate that head. I had a little bubble of color where generally the head is, and now on the second pass I can be more specific. It's a little guy. Here. Around the ear. Give this guy the bowl cut. This is what my grandmother did for me. Sorry, kid. And picking out those details, the bits of his shirt, the shadow cast that says there's a sleeve here. There's a collar going on, some fabric lines. Fabric is great for making motion. See how it's larger to smaller? Larger block, always larger to smaller. So it seems like it's an entirely different thing, watercolor. Like, what? We're totally changing up. But really, we're doing the same thing with different media. Now, I had said earlier the ground line. So let's do that again. So I've got green, sap green, but never just one color. Always, what's something that can gray it off? So when I'm doing a natural green color, I'll often go for some brown as well. Okay, so this ground line, I can use it to like carve a little bit of that arm off. And then just, I'm going to do an edge pull. Pull that shape out. Well, I had a lot of paint on the brush, not a pure edge pull, but starting from that shape and pulling it down. And while that's wet, I might just charge in some dirt, some other colors. They've been messing up this playing field. But I want to get the sense of their weight where they touch the ground. That was what I was getting at here. There's some context. All it takes is that swash of green and it says it's a soccer field. So you could keep doing this endlessly. Now it's a matter of how much time do I have before I lose my subjects entirely? Like they'll be playing the game. When is I don't know, is it innings in soccer? When does the play end? So you use as much time as you have. You can always do more details. If you just kept adding detail for the rest of time, eventually you have photographic realism. Smaller and smaller shapes. Getting into the things I missed. This kid doesn't even have an arm. I like this kind of looseness, this kind of freshness. It really feels like it's in motion, even though you're watching the drawing. It's a static thing, but you get that sense of motion. But I always want to look for areas in the picture, like these guys were kind of my most important characters. So I'm subdividing the mitten of that hand, that mitten shape, so you get the fingers in. So I'll come back. This is basically the third time through, so really it is like that idea of pencil to pen to the spot blacks. It's kind of these passes that get more and more resolution, more information each time as it comes into focus. So I want to come back and really get a face in here. So we have the eyebrows. Just the small darks, they're inside. And I'm going to pull those out a bit. Just a little bit of detail brings your eye towards that guy. Sort of says he's the star actor. I like to think of my, you're telling a story with the picture. So who's the lead? Who's the lead actor? Who are the secondary characters? These are supporting cast. This guy's Pele. See how those little darks, just spotting them in, those staccato marks, and I call calligraphy sometimes. That's starting to come together. I'm starting to see the picture there. So let's call that done. I think you can see the effect about larger to smaller. That's what I want to leave you with. If you get anything out of it, it's the sense that when I go and become a painter, I don't have to quit with any of this stuff that I've learned. Everything we've been practicing has been training you to think in that process of the outside in, working from the general to the specific, choosing the details that finish the story. So there you have it. So in the next lesson, we'll take it to what I call the bigger picture. We're going to do some or show you how I would approach a multi-figure composition, lots of people doing complex things, and how we tell stories with the drawings. So we'll see you then.